Hey guys, welcome back to Let's Be Blunt with Montel, the show where we sit down and with some of the biggest and greatest thought leaders in the industry and trailblazers in the cannabis industry to discuss their journeys, insights, and their goals. I'm your host, Montel Williams, of course, and today we have an incredible guest, someone whose influence and leadership in the cannabis space has made waves globally. Please welcome or join me in welcoming Jamie L. Pearson, president of New Holland Group. Jamie, thank you so much for being part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you. Look, let's go back for a little bit. For a lot of people who don't know a lot about you, let's talk a little bit about your background, where you grew up, what your first experiences were with cannabis, because I think it's very interesting. People want to hear that story.
Okay. So I grew up in Montana. My dad has been cultivating, I'm 55, so he's been cultivating cannabis about 57 years. He's a Vietnam vet with PTSD. And then my first cousin on my mom's side is DJ Muggs from Cypress Hill. So how I got into the industry is that Muggs asked me to help Cypress find a weed deal quite right when Colorado and some of the other states were coming on.
But at that time, you weren't involved in the cannabis industry. You weren't really a cannabis user or enthusiast. So what were you doing at the time that he asked you that?
I was a real estate investor, and I had played college and high school and USA basketball and was really, I think, hook, line, and sinker. I believed that war on drugs and thought my dad was a big loser. And, Muggs lit a joint on Saturday Night Live when I was in law school. And I was I always say there are roots and there are suits. I was a suit. And boy, did I have a lot of learning to do. And so I think I'm one of those people that can tell you from experience, the stigma is based in things that are not factual. And now I would consider myself an advocate and an activist.
And back then, again, you were involved in real estate and you were doing other diverse careers. I mean, and you saw Muggs light up on Saturday Night Live. I get that. But something had to click in your brain to say, well, this isn't as bad as I thought it was. I mean, where was that transitional point?
So the first thing I did in the cannabis industry is Muggs asked me to find the band a deal. I found a company called Bhang. That's a long story. And we did a deal. One of the first things Bhang's asked me to do after I started working there, because they asked me to come on and help with that collab, I did the customer service emails. And all of these people were writing in and they were saying things like, my wife hasn't slept a full night through in 20 years. She's got debilitating migraines or whatever the different things were. Your product has changed her life. Thank you so much. And all of a sudden I'm reading all of these emails that were pouring in from people saying, this product has made my life better. And this whole time I'm thinking it's a gateway drug. It's all of these things. And then I started hearing from people directly. It's a pretty powerful experience.
Yeah, and I mean, still at that point in time, you're working at the company, but you're still not a user.
Correct. It took me quite a number of years. I had used cannabis. One time when I was 42, I think was the first time I really used cannabis. And I had food poisoning at a wedding. And my nephew, who was about 16 at the time, said, Aunt Jamie, you have to smoke this. It'll make you stop throwing up. So he literally took me behind the barn. I was desperate. I smoked some weed and stopped throwing up instantly. And that wasn't enough. I mean, also I had a panic attack. I laid in bed next to my mom thinking, I wonder if she knows I'm high. And, all these things went through. What I know now is it was the wrong strain for me. I know what the wrong strains are for me. It's an iterative process. But I think once we get to federal legalization and we can start doing more traditional testing, which we can't do right now with it being a Schedule I drug, we can accomplish some of those types of research that will help people have less problems when they try it the first time. Because if I had had the right strain the first time, I wouldn't have had that panic attack. But did I die? No. Did anything happen? No. Really what happened is I laid there in my own head and I was no longer vomiting and no longer nauseous. So it's not lost on me that cannabis helped me tremendously that first time, but it took me a few years.
You went on to then become, I mean, you ascended the ranks and went on to become the CEO of Bang, did you not?
I did. The company went public 4 years after I started working there, and the CEO and founder stepped down almost immediately after we went public. And the board asked me to step in as interim, which I did really because I wanted to help him. Um, it was a chaotic time. I didn't know what was going to happen with the company, and I stepped in thinking I'm going to preserve his spot because I figured he would come back, but he didn't come back. And what I found when I stepped into that role was that some things needed to change. We were in pretty big trouble, and so I just had to make some tough decisions. So I came in and immediately had to, fire some people, stop leasing, just stop the bleeding, and that's what I did.
Well, if you could, talk a little bit more about some of those challenges and some of the successes that you had during your tenure as a CEO.
Well, I think the challenge that I got into right away is the challenge of running a public company. Even though we were only public on the CSE, and the way that was described to me is like the New York Stock Exchange is Disneyland, the TSX is maybe the county fair, and the CSE is like the lemonade stand at the county fair. You're trading penny stocks. But I still had to do everything with an auditor in mind, knowing that people were looking over my shoulder, meeting requirements, making sure that I was, doing press releases. I had to learn all of that. I didn't know how to run a public company. And I was sort of building the airplane while in flight, so to speak. And really, at the end of the day, it all boils down to revenue. So we were one of the larger edibles brands at the time. And I would say a few of the things that I did successfully. I converted a deal that was going south in Canada to a deal that ended up being very successful, and we ended up having around $1 million Canadian of passive income coming in after I got that deal done. And that really put some revenue on the books that allowed us to pay for the auditors and keep Bang going and keep it alive. And then while I had that revenue coming in, I was able to negotiate some other pretty transformative deals. I brought the brand over to Europe. I did an 11-state deal with Kim Rivers at Trulieve and was able to get some more states open. So by the time I left, we were in 7 US states. We were the number one chocolate in Canada. And we were on track to do a pretty big deal with Trulieve and also get Europe open. So once my kids graduated from college, 3 years running a public company, it was enough. I had said, okay, I'm going to tap out. I'll give you 6 months notice. And then the private equity company that was kind of pulling strings behind the scenes, they put the head of their board in as CEO, and he's still the CEO as far as I know.
That's great. And then you went on to create the new Holland Group, correct?
Correct.
Talk
Yes.
to me a little bit about this. You took some time off first, right?
Yeah, my kids both graduated from college, and I promised each one of them a trip. So we did some international travel. And then people were calling me saying, "What are you doing? I've got this project. Is there any chance you might be able to just step in fractionally and help us?" And my plan was to go back into real estate, which had been really lucrative and quite a bit easier, if I'm being honest. But what happened was I got brought on to do some really fun and interesting projects, and I liked the flexibility that doing consulting allowed me to have. So I just went ahead and started the firm and just kept, one thing led to another. I don't have a website yet. I'm still working on those basic block and tackling of owning a business. But I have enough business coming in that, I kind of don't need that stuff right now. So, first things first, I'm taking care of the people that need me.
Wow. And talk about what the new Holland Group does. What is it? Explain it to us.
Well, I read, write, speak fluent German, which has been, quite an asset for what's happening in Germany. I do a lot of work with clients who want to either bring their brands into Europe, specifically Germany, because that's really the train, the engine that drives that European train. And then I do a lot of work with, I would call it CEO decision therapy. It's really lonely at the top, having been there. And when you have to keep things secret because you have forward looking statements and you have requirements around, public company, you just can't tell people what's happening all the time because you can get in trouble for that. then you can't really talk to people. So what happens then is you would think, oh, well, I can talk to my COO or I can talk to my whomever, but those people have skin in the game and have their own sets of worries. So if you really just want someone to bounce things off of, what's happened sort of organically is that some of these CEOs that I work for, when the project ended, they asked me if I would just stay on so that they could have an ear of saying, okay, I'm thinking about doing this. And then I just ask them questions. So, what are your shareholders going to think about that? And they get to hear themselves talking out loud through the process of making decisions. So, I do a lot of CEO coaching, I would call it, and I do a lot of strategy around international expansion or state to state expansion. Because people got to remember, in a perfect world, you would be able to manufacture your products in one place and then just stick them on a truck and sell them everywhere, which would make things easier for consistency and for lab testing and all of those things. But you can't do that right now. It's still Schedule 1 in the US. You can't cross borders. So, like at Bang, it was constantly this decision making process of, should I buy that machine in that state, or should I try to figure out a way to only have one of those machines do that piece of the supply chain in the one state where I have the machine? But it's just an inefficient way of manufacturing products. So a lot of times you're parallel processing different scenarios just by virtue of the fact that you can't cross state lines.
And
Because
you're processing with different feedstock, also different product, correct? Because I mean, again, cannabis is as different as every seed that you put in the ground.
it's really a challenging business, and once we get federal legalization, so many things are going to normalize. You got one hand tied behind your back.
I'm sorry, wait. I'm going to stop you just for half a second because I was going to wait to go there, but I like the fact that you keep bringing it up. So let's go there right now. I
Let's do
mean,
it.
come on. Now, you really, the president elect's choice for head of the Senate is a guy who is completely anti-cannabis, actually anti any truth behind any medical validity to cannabis. That's Senator Thune. So we got Thune coming in office, and you got a guy who's saying that he doesn't even believe that cannabis works. It's not a medicine. So right there, that's like chopping the knees off of this industry in a sense, because he's basically saying there's no validity to it. So therefore, why would we have anything else? Why do you have recreational? Why? So I mean, and this whole idea, you said it twice, of the Fed doing something to change the scheduling. I got to tell you, I have been I've been in this business now for 22 years, long before it was Vogue. I was way in this business back in 2001 when people were telling me I was crazy for even speaking out. And I am shocked that as of today, it's taken us this long just to get to where we are today. But the truth of the matter is, if in fact the Fed does, from my perspective, and we can discuss this and tell me if I'm right or wrong, but when the Fed just makes a decision, if they make this, and I'm going to say that, smack myself in the back of the head 3 times, if they make the decision to reschedule this to a Schedule 3 drug, it's going to have to go through the Senate to get that finally confirmed. And I think it's going to be a really tough time for them to do that. But if let's say they do that, it's going to open up a quagmire and list of issues that's going to be another 15 years in rolling out. Why? Because if it becomes a Schedule 3 drug, who's responsible for anything on the Schedule 3? Oh, that group of people called the FDA. Well, what if they get rid of the FDA? Well, they get rid of the FDA, they turn it back over to the states, and then each state. By the time we look at this 5 years from now, will we really have a Schedule 3 drug? Probably not. Why? Because Schedule 3 drugs should be able to be sold at pharmacies, not just these things that are called dispensaries. So you got these buildings that got built, this whole infrastructure that got built that's really contrary to what the federal law would be. Take a look at what's going on in Georgia. In Georgia, they have allowed for cannabis to be distributed through independent pharmacies across the state, along with giving licenses to groups that can actually open dispensaries. But the difference between a dispensary and a pharmacy is going to be crazy. The Fed's already stepped in and said, if you sell anything in a dispensary and a pharmacy, we're going to come and shut you down. But then they now back that off. I mean, I think that the quagmire that's about to hit this industry, I don't even think we've even come close to understanding how disastrous that could be. This thing needs to be either descheduled or maybe, I don't know. I'm caught in the middle because I'm caught in the middle of my brain trying to figure out if they deschedule, that means that they still leave it up to the states. If they leave it up to the states, then the states are still going to fight this crossing state lines, and they're going to want to tax. 15 more years of just no man's land and ridiculousness. That's my point of view. What do you think?
Well, first, I want to say thank you because you were talking about it 20 years ago. And it's people like you that got us even where we are today, because we needed to have people who had the courage to say, enough's enough. So, the first thing I want to do is express gratitude to you for being one of those vocal people, because someone like me who just sat on the fence and thought it was stupid and didn't understand, who now have had my mind changed. And I know that it's beneficial for people who have different ailments. I know this. My daughter has epilepsy. We got her off those epilepsy medications that were not good for her. I'm so grateful that that was even possible. And it's because of people like you. That's the first thing I want to say. Second thing I want to say is what you just experienced, that entire conversation that you had with what if, what if, what if, what if. That's cannabis. It's what cannabis has been for the last 20 years. It's been an absolute mess of people trying to figure out what the workaround is. And the next rule comes and the workaround comes. The next rule comes and the workaround comes. Cannabis executives and people in this industry are resilient, and we're going to figure it out, because the one thing that won't change, and you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube, is that the citizens of the United States overwhelmingly are waking up with some access to it, and they want it. I think the biggest predictor for me is when I think about who are the income earners and who are the voters and who are the people that are coming into power. It is the Gen Zers and the millennials, and they're drinking alcohol less and less, and they're very, very pro plant medicine. And look, that's going to have a factor. Does it mean we're going to have federal legalization tomorrow, next year, 3 years, 5 years? Should it be quicker? It should. It's absolutely asinine to think that we can all, as adults, smoke cigarettes that we know kill people. We can drink alcohol, which we know not only kills the people drinking it, but people who are drinking alcohol kill other people. It isn't about really safety or the conversation about what about the children. All of that is really just buying time for the lobbies of big alcohol, big pharma, big tobacco to figure out how to hedge their losses, because they're losing out. And we know this. And right now, politicians are figuring out where they're going to get their money from. That's my 2 cents on all of that. Is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And yeah, it's going to take time. But every time we make a little bit of progress, you see companies are blowing the door off of it and more states want it. And there'll just come a point in time where it will be time. In my opinion, I think the time is now, but I don't think anyone in Washington's listening to what I have to say. So, but I think a lot of us out there, as the population of Americans starts to speak with a unified voice on this topic, it becomes harder and harder for politicians to ignore that. So I think we'll just keep making baby steps, and it'll only be a matter of time before legalization comes. It's coming.
Well, I get what you're saying, Jimmy, that, the industry is always has to be resilient and figure out ways and workarounds. But, at some point in time, we're going to have to get to a point where this industry is viably working around the fact that the more and the harder we work in the legal market, the black and gray market is booming, and booming even bigger than it was before, I believe, any form of legalization had taken place. So how do we counterbalance that? Because again, unfortunately, around the country, I know I was just having a conversation with a relative about another relative that's in Tennessee, where Tennessee is not legal, but they have all this legal trash that's being sold in gas stations under the terms of, whatever, hemp-based crap, but it's really not even hemp-based. I don't know what these guys are selling. That, there are a lot of people getting sick from. And so now we've got to counterbalance, that fake idea that cannabis is bad for you because it's making people sick, but it's not the cannabis that's making people sick. It's all this workaround, this crap that's being sold that's, Delta 8 and, Delta 10 and all these things that and what is it, THCO, all of these crazy chemically induced trash that's going to really just do nothing but make this industry look bad.
Well, that's one of the things I speak about around the world. I just did a presentation in Iceland that was government sponsored, and just did another one in Germany. I gave one of these talks in Spain a couple years ago, and the premise of the talk is essentially, what are the things that countries can expect when they legalize cannabis? And one of the things that happens invariably is that the country will, the first step is always they decriminalize, because they want to take some of the pressure off of police, and the judicial system. And they're saying, look, if we're going to go ahead and legalize, we're going to decriminalize first. Well, what happens then, I'll use Germany as an example. When they decriminalized cannabis first, the rule was if you're caught with 25 grams of cannabis, you're good. Well, so if you were the plug on the street that was selling cannabis and you had to kind of, make sure that you weren't going to get caught, now you can stand on the corner. And I think, just for people who aren't familiar, 25 grams of cannabis, a big, giant, fat joint is 1 gram. That's like 25 joints. So you get to walk around with 25 joints,
like a
right?
half ounce. Yeah, maybe, close.
Yeah. It's enough cannabis. It's a lot of cannabis for one person to have on their person and for personal use. So what you've essentially done is emboldened the illicit market. And what happens is it does explode because they can basically go get their cash grab with impunity for a period of time. But what comes next is that there's always this, race to the bottom, because what happens is as these producers start growing, there isn't enough cannabis, legal cannabis, to meet demand because there's so much demand. Then they get more cannabis going, they start scaling up. And then what you end up having is more supply than demand. And then everybody who is in a cash crunch right now, nobody can raise money. So they're having to reduce the cost. And pretty soon you have this parity between the illicit market price and the legal market price. And only the truly best operators who have margin, who have efficiencies, they're the ones that make it, because they're selling cannabis that's lab tested and taxed at the same price that the illicit market is. And pretty soon the illicit market it isn't worth it. And they go away. It's just too much hassle. They can make more money trafficking people or fentanyl or whatever else.
That's in places like Germany, but here in the United States, back in 2021, we sold about $25 billion worth of legal cannabis in all the states that were legal then. But we sold over $75 billion worth of black market cannabis, and it's still happening today. You go down to places like Tennessee, places like Georgia, which is really crazy.
Think about Glass House. I don't know if you're familiar with that company out of California. They are selling an eighth for $9.99 out the door. And I will tell you that if the people that live in the vicinity of Glass House and they get to choose, do I want to go get that $9.99 eighth, or do I want, and it can be delivered right to your door. So why would I go to the plug when I know that could have something in it? I just think eventually we'll get there. And the point I make to these governments is you can buy anything you want in a middle school bathroom. You want heroin, you want fentanyl, it's all available in a public school. I was a public school teacher for many years. I know this for a fact. You know what you can't buy in a middle school bathroom? Cigarettes and alcohol.
Right.
It's just how that works. So we are in that process right now of getting to that place. And the dust hasn't settled yet, but the majority of Americans wake up every day and have access to some form of cannabinoids. And I will tell you that there are bad operators in the hemp industry, and they're exploiting a loophole. There are a lot of good operators in the hemp industry that have figured out how to make good products out of, I've got a client, for example, that makes vaginal suppositories for women in menopause, and she's going the hemp route because it is not reasonable for a woman in menopause to be expected to go into a dispensary and say, "What do you got for menopause?" Bud tenders don't know. That is a direct to consumer product. And the only way she can do that is with a hemp derived product. She's going to be a responsible owner. She's going to make a good product. They're going to get third party lab testing. It'll be safe. It'll be good. So there's room for both of those industries. I think they need to come together, the cannabis and hemp industries, and there needs to be regulation. The real problem with the hemp industry is it's a free for all right now. But it doesn't take away the fact there are a lot of good actors in that part of the world.
Yeah, I just fear the fact that the free for all is going to last for 20 years. And along with it is going to come all of the negativity behind all of the bad products that are in the marketplace. I mean, I know, again, there's places like, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas. There's some of these places where they're selling garbage out of 7-Elevens or out of, gas station back doors and or put them on the counter at the gas station because it's hemp. You can sell hemp. Well, you know what? Just because it's hemp and you can sell it doesn't mean that people should be consuming that shit, thinking that they're getting something equivalent to true medical cannabis.
True. I agree with you on that point for sure.
And when you look around, what's going to see? I mean, I kind of think, I've been again doing this for 23, 24 years. It almost seems crazy that I've been doing this long, and trying to talk through and work through. And I've spoken to most of the biggest conventions in the country, around the world. From Israel to Jamaica to I've been England, and what I'm starting to see myself is the fact that internationally the growth of cannabis, though it's on a very, very slow growth, the grow or pitch, it's growing. And when you look at places like South Africa, you look at places like Colombia, you look at places like Chile, you look at places like Peru, pretty soon the amount of cannabis and real cannabis, not just hemp, but cannabis that people will be able to ship and export and import and export around the world is going to put America in like a little corner over here. We're getting ready to get left behind if we don't get our crap together.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think Germany and Europe are a great example of places where that market's going to be so big that it's going to be hard for America to ignore it, and we'll see what happens. I'm really optimistic. I don't know why I'm optimistic when I look at history, but I just think the more people that are using cannabis, the more empathy I feel like is growing in the world, the more understanding, the more the stigma gets fought. And it's encouraging to me to see these other countries getting on board. One of the points I try to make when I'm out in the world is that it isn't just a matter of the lab testing and the taxation that make cannabis a compelling change for society, but it's also the gigantic bucket of money that comes from harm reduction. When you think about right now, all of the people sitting in prison, where we've removed all of those productive citizens from being able to earn and pay taxes. In fact, they're a drain on society. And when you think about it, most of those crimes are nonviolent. And then there's trauma being perpetrated against their children, against their spouses, against their mothers. So there's a lot of trauma that comes out of having someone in prison. And when you think about the statistic that blows me away is that the places that legalize in general solve 20% of their unsolved violent crime because the resources of the police can be reallocated to things that actually matter. Are we safer when a person is pulled off the street who had a joint, possessed a joint? That's ridiculous, and we know that.
And what's more ridiculous, though, in some of the states that we have legal cannabis, there are still people being pulled off the street with joints. This is mind-boggling. California seems to have been leading the path to legalization and adult use, but still in California, you have people being arrested for having cannabis in their pockets in municipalities and cannabis in the state of California that don't allow it.
It's all over the U.S. It's unconscionable. And all of this, when I think 100 years from now, when we look back, there'll be this blip of time, call it 40 years, where we're looking at this whole ridiculousness. And it will be a footnote in history. It'll be, yeah, it took about 40 years and now here we are.
Well, you know,
And
I,
in the middle of
your lips to God's ears, but I
it,
kind of feel like it's going to be 200 years because it's taken us 100 years just to get to here. You know, let's go back to 1937 Tax Act. You know, it's taken us.
right.
It's not 37, but you know, what are we? What 13 years away? So I mean, you know, and in that 100 years, we still haven't figured this out. And right now, we still have enough legislators in our that have been voted in office that want to try to roll this back. I mean, I just heard about was it North Dakota or Wyoming? You know, they passed. I guess they did pass, and now the legislators are going after the people who are involved in putting the ballot initiative on the ballot. What? What? This is just, it's mind boggling how we still have, you know, the tale of two societies. You know, we have a society, one group that says, yeah, I'll take taxes, I'll take the tax money and revenue that we can get, but at the same time, I'm going to put your butt in jail if you do this. What?
Yeah, they all need to smoke cannabis. I mean, and then they'll
Boy.
come into some knowing. It's really where I went through that myself. I had these really dumb, archaic, conservative ideas about everything. And then once I started using cannabis, really using cannabis, I I was able to think a little bit deeper, shift some paradigms, challenge some of my norms and my own thinking. I think the people that are fighting against this are just thinking they're wrong thinking. They're just wrong. Period.
Absolutely. And you know what? But you know what's so crazy to me with this thing, and I don't know, you know, your views may be entirely different than mine on this. I really believe we don't really have the real conversation. We're too trying to be too polite to have the real conversation. This has been a tool that's been used as a re-enslavement tool since 1937. This is a way to put black men and people of color in prisons to keep us out of society. And now there are some people that are freaking out, in fact, that they don't have this little extra tool in their quiver to lock people up indiscriminately, even for nonviolent crime. So, and they're not willing to give it up. If you take a look at what's going on right now and what's about to happen, I don't know, you know, it's very interesting. You know, the president-elect has selected a guy as attorney general who is a cannabis-friendly individual. You know, there are rumors about him, you know, the same as the rumors about him being, you know, having some issues when it comes to younger girls. There are plenty of rumors about him being at parties where he has been a consumer himself. So if Matt Gaetz ends up being affirmed, we could have really, you know, there'll be all the brain cells in our heads will be fighting with each other because on one hand, you got a guy who, you know, has a history of doing untowards things to underage women, but at the same time, he's a guy who has a history of being favorable towards cannabis. So now, which one do you pick? Do we say it's okay if you pick cannabis for us, but you're a pervert? You know, it's weird. And then put that up against the Thunes of the Senate, which there's a lot of them who are still anti-cannabis. We got at least another 15 years before these people age out.
Well, here's my hope.
Okay.
The one thing I think is that President-elect has one God that he worships, and that would be the almighty dollar. And I think that these industries are generating jobs and they're generating tax revenue. And he's already gone on record. He said he was going to vote for yes on 3 in Florida.
And it didn't pass in Florida, which is mind-boggling to me. I happen to be telling you from Miami.
Spending tax money to fight against it, which I think should be illegal. I think that's crazy that he was able to do that.
He was able to do that with not just cannabis, but also do that with for abortion. He was using tax dollars to propagate propaganda, which is really, I just don't understand it, and got away with it. And let me tell you, I live in Brickell, Miami. You can't walk around this block of my building without wafting smells of cannabis coming from everywhere. And the majority of people, you go to places like the what is it, the villages down here, which I've had multiple people try to get me to get involved in the villages with some of the products that we have because they are probably one of the biggest consuming areas. These are all the, it's an adult community. Yeah. And this, and what's true about this is that the second we start to recognize the fact that why are so many countries turning away from the UN Treaty of 1963 that prohibited importation and exportation of hemp and cannabis? Why are they turning away from it? Is because they're starting to realize that the price of pharmaceuticals that they get out of us and out of some places in Europe are so astronomical that cannabis has become in multiple countries around the world almost like a geriatric drug. You go to Israel, turn 65, you can get it for free from the hospital. Go down and show your driver's license and get it. Why? Because they know that using cannabis takes their adult citizenry off of probably 5 to 6 different medications that they've been on. Wow, huh? So when the world starts to figure that out, and again, from my perspective, I think we used to be and could claim that we are the leaders in this movement worldwide. But I'm going to tell you that shift's going to happen, I think, very quickly in the next 3 to 5 years. Canada has already, got a foothold all over the world. And, South Africa is now bringing their million hectares of cannabis and hemp to market, and Colombia doing the same. There's a lot of cannabis being grown. China's already growing hemp like crazy, though I would never consume anything from China. But still, they're growing hemp like crazy, and they're going to try it. They get it. They got it. They understand this. Let's just figure out how we can make this acceptable legally. And the second they open up that door, it's going to be crazy.
You and we could have this conversation till the cows come
Yes.
home. And we know that this is a conversation about the hypocrisy of the American government, because we know that it's all about money. It's about lobbying. It's not about what's best for humanity. It's not about what's best for our citizens. It's about the machine. So the machine is chugging along, and the insurance companies, the public companies, stockholders, that's all that anyone cares about that's in power right now. And really, until we get Citizens United overturned, we're just going to have dark money in politics, and all dark money cares about is making more money. And making money, it doesn't matter who's trampled under the shoes of that. So yeah, other countries that have politics where the wellness of their citizenry is actually top of mind, you're seeing them rush to get cannabis involved in what they've got going on, because it does have better outcomes for their citizens. And, the one thing we all have going for us is, until that's taken away from us, we have the right to go to other places. It's the argument, oh, well, we made abortion legal. All I did was give it to the state. So if you're a 12-year-old girl in Mississippi who gets raped, all you got to do is go get an abortion. You just got to go to Montana and get an abortion, because that state said you could have one. Your state says you can't. You just got to go somewhere else. Well, in the cannabis argument, what's happening basically is some states say you can have it, some states say you can't. And they're just going to go do this whole states' rights crap. And we will have access to cannabis. It'll continue to grow as people decide they want it. And until that money machine recognizes the power that cannabis could be for them, we're going to keep having to play these games and talk in double entendre and all of that. That's not going to change. But what's also not going to change is that the cannabis industry is not going to give up. We're just going to keep pushing forward.
Well, Jimmy, you're right. We can actually talk about this till the cows come home and not barely even scratch the surface. I want to get into a little bit more about you, your philosophies, and some of the things that I think has set you apart from so many others in this industry. You have really set upon a mission of making sure that you're passionate about diversity and women's representation in the industry. How can we move towards more inclusive cannabis business environment nationwide? I mean, because I think that's one of the things that's really, really missing.
When I was running Bhang, we had one of our board members step down, and I was tasked with filling that board seat. And I remember we had just done a big demographic data scrape, and we figured out that the people that were using our product were really diverse. It was old and young, men and women, black, white, every kind of race in the middle, gay, straight. It just really ran the gamut. And I thought, I've got everybody on my board is white and I'm the only woman. Like this, I can't get advice from people about what we're doing in the communities we're serving from people that don't have any idea who we're addressing. So I went about trying to find a qualified person of either, another female or a person of color, male or female. I just wanted to have some diversity because I needed some help in those areas. And I will tell you, I did it with intention, and I had to send some, I would say, really uncomfortable emails to people who didn't know me. You don't know me, but you seem very qualified to be on my board. I am looking for people that I know that we don't know each other, we don't know people in common, but would you consider being on the board of a cannabis chocolate company? And eventually found an uber qualified, really wonderful man, who was a cross border M&A specialist, practiced licensed to practice law in New York City and also in Canada. His name's Daniel Noth. He was really wonderful. And then I ended up getting the COO of Open Table, who's a queer woman. And I had to find those people by being very intentional. The thing that concerns me about this backlash against DEI right now is that when you have power sitting in positions where, and look, I don't feel like white men are the devil. I don't feel like white men rub their hands together and go, we're going to exclude everybody. What I think happens is that power and money sat with white men from the beginning of America because that's the way it was. Even though we were supposed to be a country, based on equality, all men free and whatever, none of that was true. And we all know that.
Ever, yeah, right.
Ever. So what happens though is just like in every community, you want to surround yourself with people that look like you, think like you, talk like you, sound like you. That's what makes people comfortable. So when a position comes open, it would be easy for me to place a board seat with, somebody that look like me, sound like me, talk like me. But the reality is the magic happens when you intentionally go seek someone that's different from you. But that's not what's normal and natural. DEI really solves that problem because it says you have to do that. And then it means that power and money actually get spread into circles where it's not always this endemic circle of, oh, my buddy that I golf with, his son is looking for a job and I'm just going to give that job to him because I know he's a good egg, right? Well, there's good eggs everywhere. There's talent everywhere. And if you're not looking for it intentionally, we have to have the government step in and say, this has to be done intentionally. I remember one time that when I was doing this, searching for my board member, another person knew I was looking for a board member, said, hey, send me anybody you've got. And I said, well, what are you looking for? Well, all I'm looking for is qualified. And there was this implication that because they were women or because they were of color, that they weren't qualified, when the opposite was actually true. These people had to work harder and prove themselves by being better. And I actually found way more talent and way more understanding and more emotional intelligence and more empathy and more skills by going outside of my circle. So yeah, I'm passionate about that. It's been my experience that
Do you see?
I felt
I
like
mean,
now.
do you see this catching on? Because, like I tell you, you are truly one of a kind, I believe, or one of very few in this industry who literally puts their money where their mouth is. I mean, there's a lot of lip service to diversity, inclusion, and equity, and but some of that is just that, just lip service. And there are very few people like you who actually implement and do. You hire, you do, you've shown in your track record. I mean, do you think this is starting to? I mean, especially in an industry like this one, you would think that more and more people would understand that I want to have a product that sells across the board. Doesn't matter what the demographic is that's purchasing it, rather than not give a damn about whether or not they can cross demographic lines. You understand what I mean?
You know, I don't know the answer to that, but I want to remain hopeful. And one of the things I think again is that money talks. And I will say the Black community, the Asian community, they have tremendous buying power, and you would be a fool not to try to tap the Latin community. When I think about in cannabis right now, is there a brand that speaks specifically to Mexicans? Is there a brand that speaks specifically to Chinese people? There isn't. We don't have that yet. What we have are a lot of the California brands where everyone's blonde hair and blue eyed, and yeah, that's a market. But there are gigantic untapped markets, and if you're really a savvy business person, you'd be trying to tap those markets. It's not just an issue of being a tree hugging feminist liberal or whatever. It's about being savvy at business. 85% of most of the purchasing decisions in a household are made by women. That's a statistic that is proven time and time again. Why wouldn't you have a woman in your executive team, on your board, or somewhere other than your administrative assistant if you want to go tap the decision makers of the dollars in the industry at the CPG level? I think the way to do that is through data driven decision making. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have comfort with people who don't look like them, talk like them, sound like them. And, we look at the statistics. Women that run companies tend to provide better value. They're better stewards of resources. I don't know what it's going to take other than, the women who do end up in these positions, the people of color who do end up in these positions end up crushing and doing so well that as their stars rise, hopefully they'll bring people with them. That's what I'm hopeful for. And I think when the glass ceiling cracks, when people have access and they share that access, magic happens. And I think we're starting to see magic happen in some of these places. It's slow moving. It's painfully slow, but I do think it's happening.
Wow. I'm going to run out of time here in a minute, but I have to ask you, as you look to the future, you look, let's, I was talking about it earlier about, I think it's going to be 10 to 15 years before there's a real difference made. But let's say if you had to put your crystal ball on and you wanted to describe what the next 5 years would be like, what do you think is going to happen in the industry, not only in the United States, but also this industry globally?
Well, I think more and more people are going to continue to discover and enjoy cannabis. And I think as that we reach the tipping point, because there will be a tipping point where it will just be a matter of time where so many people are using cannabis that the government intrusion and restrictions against us are just not going to work anymore. Especially once we hit that 50 to 51 state majority of those states that have legal cannabis, it's just a matter of time. I think we're going to see more of it. I think we're going to build more empathy, and I think the pendulum's going to swing in our direction.
I mean, we are literally almost there right now. When you take a look at the fact, I think there are now 40 states. If I'm not mistaken, did not 2 states just vote in last week? So
yes.
That means we're 40 states and the District of Columbia. That's over 80% of the United States. That's more states that made a decision. That's more than the states that made a decision on gay marriage. So, we're at that point where now we've got almost 80% of America statewide that have some sort of legal cannabis programs going on. You would think that we are at a point where this government would say, okay, it's time for us to just flip the switch. We got to. But, then at the same time, you got all these politicians still trying to roll this back.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe the sex offender crew will come in and do something for us. I don't know. We'll, the pedophile boys will come in and help us. I don't know. But I hope so.
Yeah. Well, if people wanted to get more information from you, or at least look at some of the things you've written and some of the things that you talk about, where could they go?
I think the easiest thing right now is to go find me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. If you want to see my kids, it's all pictures of them. jboogie.22. I'm, like I said, I don't really market myself too much, but if you want to find me, LinkedIn's the easiest place to go.
I've been in this industry also for close to 24 years. And in the last few years, I've had a presence in Massachusetts. I had a presence in Georgia. I've got some other states that have asked for a presence there, and I've been working on a couple of different initiatives. So maybe we might reach out to you just to see if we can pick your brain a little bit, also. You know what I mean?
I'd be honored to help you. And I think I've already got some ideas about where I would like to have you exert some influence, because I think you have a unique voice in the cannabis industry. I've followed you pretty much your entire career. And, I think about, you're really a person who can speak specifically to the medical industry. And in Germany, that is the biggest market and will continue to be the biggest market. And I think you can have some influence over there. So,
I'll tell you a very funny story. And before I will let you go, this is back the year, well, about 8 months before Germany actually passed their law to allow medical cannabis. I literally was going through the airport in Germany, traveling through Germany, going to actually Dubrovnik. And this is going to sound crazy, but I cleaned my bags out. I had nothing there, thought I had nothing there. And I literally was going through that secondary screening thing before you go into another country. And one of the TSA kind of people there pulls out a little jar about this big, had about 3 grams, no, probably about 1.5 grams of keef in there that I forgot was in my bag. And I'm like, holy moly, they pulled me over. You have to stand here. And within 2 minutes, this was already on TMZ here in the United States, okay?
oh,
I'm over
wow.
there, and Montel Williams gets busted in the German airport. Well, this is the funniest thing in the world. I'm standing there waiting, and walking up to me were 3 people in civilian clothing, but you knew they were police. You know what I'm saying? You just could see the way they
Right.
were walking or strolling. One of them happened to be a woman who was like 6'1", blonde lady walking up to me, and
It's all bad
I
shoes.
bet you she's got this phone in her hand. And I see her as she's walking up from 40 feet away. She's literally reading her phone. Well, in that period of time, she had already Googled me. She comes up to me and she says, "Mr. Williams, I see you very big advocate for cannabis. What we just found in your bag says that cannabis." I said, yes, yes. Well, it's not legal here yet, but it has just gotten voted in and passed and will be legal in 6 months. And so we believe in marijuana and its medical.
Oh,
So she
wow.
said,
Yeah.
she gives it back to me. And she said, and she
Yay.
gave it back to me. She said, please do not do this in this airport. Please, you can go on to where you're going. And hopefully, if you come back in 6 months, you'll understand that we have a legal program here too. I was like completely blown away. I took it, put it back in my bag. I took it instead of putting it in my bag. I literally dumped it in the toilet in the bathroom because I thought, oh shit, this is in my bag, and I'm gonna pull into a place like Dubrovnik, former Soviet country. I might go to jail. So, but it was just so hysterical. And then I've not been back. So yeah, Germany. I'm very interested in being involved in the process there. So let's reach out and chat, okay?
We'll certainly talk about it. Yeah, my Dubrovnik story, that trip I took my kids on, we went to Dubrovnik. That was my son's choice. And I cleaned all the cannabis out of my life, I thought. And then when I laid down on the Chase Lounge to put my sunglasses on, I had a joint in my sunglass case. And I was like, yes, it is great.
That's so
I was so
crazy.
happy.
Look, we barely scratched the surface. There's so much more I could talk to you about. So anytime you ever want to come back, Jamie, you have a seat here. Anytime anything is going on, you want to discuss it, you got always have just want to chop it up. Come on back, okay?
Yeah, thanks. For sure.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And I know that our viewers are going to love this conversation. So if you want to hear more about Jamie, you can look her up on LinkedIn. She said that's a place to go and find her. And, of course, I want you to keep tuning in to Let's Be Blunt with Montel. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.